Dear Board of Directors, welcome. As CEO, my vision has always been to build a purpose-driven company that does good, and we have not completely lived up to it in Japan. This is, of course, unacceptable. We severely condone the spread of misinformation, cyberbullying, and the organization of terrorist activities on our platform. However, we will never censor criticism of any governmental institution. That said, we have always stated that we want to be the platform that promotes a healthy conversation, and now more than ever, it is crucial that we ensure this happens. In times of complexity and uncertainty, the typical transactional leadership is insufficient. It is through transformational leadership that we will create impact. Hence, I want to start by sharing my why with you. Twitter has altered the political discourse and society in permanent and profound ways by democratizing speech, and we do not intend to go back. As my father, who worked in quantum physics, always said, whatever we do creates a ripple effect that impacts every single other particle. Therefore, we need to be mindful of the externalities generated by our actions. But how can we ensure a safe space for our users? We are facing more paradoxes than ever. Should we compromise freedom of speech for social responsibility? How do we deal with governmental ultimatums while staying true for our values? Of course, we want to do the right thing, but we also want to do things the right way. My colleagues will first outline ethical considerations to determine the right things, then they will present how we will do this the right way. For that part, I ask that you really keep in mind one key point. Team is very important to us, particularly in the Japanese context. First, I hand it over to our Chief Compliance Officer.
Thanks. For me as Compliance Officer, it's decisive to settle our why on solid ethical foundations and social responsibility, preventing Twitter from being banned in Japan. It's urgent. It means acting on our social contract, earning profits by serving societal and governmental interests, as well as incorporating diverse stakeholders from regulators to users, corporate sponsors, and device manufacturers. Given our geographic reach, you would think that solutions must be customized to meet varying needs of each region, right? I can tell you it's wrong. There's no Japanese nor US internet, it's universal. Given cultural convergence, we need some standardization. Our CEO's quantum physics analogy expresses it. We are all interconnected and require an overarching code of conduct. Nothing similar exists yet. We have to collaborate with key industry players and supranational organizations like the International Press Institute. Thereby, we represent not only Twitter, but an entire industry, coping with the paradox of freedom of speech and social responsibility, and a commitment to promote public safety and data privacy with no tolerance for misinformation. While a global code of conduct does not allow us to abide by the Japanese government's ultimatum, we can leverage the coalition's support. Besides Japanese social media Line, Twitter is the most used social media platform in Japan, with Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok following closely. Capitalizing on the coalition's collective bargaining power, we co-create with the Japanese government for appropriate compromise in the best interest of everyone. So we pursue a proactive approach instead of being reactive, not waiting for governments to regulate, but taking the first step. It reduces ambiguity and operational complexity. Now I hand over to our CTO, Johannes.
Thanks. While this industry coalition is key, we do not shy away from our individual responsibility. Our CEO previously mentioned team. Here's what it means. T for transparency, E for education, A for adaptation, and M for moderation. Team is our action plan to make Twitter a safe platform, especially in Japan. The first step of team is to ensure transparency in two ways. First, we want to be transparent about how we operate. Starting next month, we will launch pop-up tweets to educate our users about our content guidelines and provide more detailed information if a tweet gets taken offline to increase transparency. Let me be clear, we do not tolerate any kind of terrorist activities on our platform and will fully comply with Japan's request to terminate such accounts. However, we stand up for our users' right to critically voice their views on the government in a way that aligns with the high-context Japanese culture. We will measure this initiative's effectiveness using a very Twitter-native KPI, the number of daily tweets using the Twitter censorship hashtag, aiming for 50% decline. Second, we want to increase the credibility of the content on our platform. Japanese culture builds on the concept of inyo, two balancing forces that make up all aspects of life. In line with this philosophy, we will roll out program shakai, the Japanese word for community. Using this, our community can provide balance to controversial statements by adding clarifications and opposing views backed up by official sources. Moving on to the E of team. Education, as beautifully said by Franklin D. Roosevelt, is the real safeguard of our democracy. We will never be able to filter out every single piece of misinformation. We believe that we can educate and empower our users to critically reflect on their social media content. Especially in Japan, where collectivism might lead to groupthink, we see a strong need to raise awareness on this issue by deploying several educational initiatives. One of them is integrating a tutorial in the sign-up flow, teaching users about how the negative impact of destructive social media behavior on society can play out. We furthermore partnered up with Mamoru Miyano, Japan's most famous anime star, to create a public awareness campaign addressing the issue of fake news to reach a broad part of Japan's population.
This brings us to the A in team, which stands for adaptation to the Japanese culture, especially for interacting with its government. There are two facets to this adaptation. First, diplomacy is a key skill to operate in the Japanese business landscape. Thus, we established a dedicated communications team composed of locals who understand the subtleties of Japan's high-context communication and respect-oriented culture. They will be tasked with cultivating a long-term relationship with government officials based on mutual understanding. The second objective for adaptation is accommodating to Japan's unique cultural context. Having one of the highest uncertainty avoidance scores across the globe, we understand the government's desire to avoid reputational risk posed by the relatively unmoderated expression on our platform. However, we would like to appeal to the same uncertainty avoidance and the government's resultant decision-making processes, which evaluate risks in depth before making any decisions. Thus, we at Twitter would also like to take a similar approach, not deleting violating accounts immediately before evaluating the risks adequately. Finally, this brings us to the M of team, which means moderation. Our moderation mechanisms account for sensitivity and structure. In the past, there have been threats surrounding sensitive issues such as radical political movements, which were unfortunately carried out on our platform. While our proprietary technology filters for misinformation, it does not necessarily detect politically sensitive issues. Thus, we want to further develop our algorithm in collaboration with key stakeholders like the government and local experts who really understand these local issues of a sensitive nature. Using their input, we can refine our algorithm to flag tweets of a sensitive nature and put these on hold for manual review. When dealing with sensitive issues, a structured response is critical. Hence, we would like to appeal to Japan's culture's distinctive long-term orientation and take a pragmatic approach. To do this, we introduce a multi-tier moderation process and dedicated response teams to manually review anomalies flagged by the algorithm. This will ensure that all moderation aligns with our company values and prioritize society's best interests in the long term.
Thank you all for your explanations. As CEO, I am confident we have developed a solid action plan guided by strong leadership for the Japanese challenge. I ask you to approve a budget of $200 million, comparable to 20% of last year's R&D budget, to cover all initiatives in Japan. By doing so, we make Twitter continuously stay relevant in the industry and protect its values. We already contacted key players like Meta and TikTok. Our first priority is to align on a common code of conduct for the industry-wide coalition, serving as a beacon for our values and allowing us to fight back opposing pressure. We have no tolerance against the spread of misinformation on our platform, but we also have no tolerance against the censoring of criticism to the government, as Twitter stands for democratization of speech. Second, we implement our team initiative specifically tailored to the particularities of the Japanese context, and its progress will be continuously monitored via KPIs. By doing all of this, we want to leave no space for the Japanese government to be able to fairly criticize our new proactive regulation. These initiatives embody our values and bring us closer to our bigger why, to be a platform that is a safe space for healthy conversations in Japan and globally. Join us on this journey. It is now in your hands.